If I stop walking now, no one will ever find me, not even God. The first scream of the storm rose like a living thing, a long, ragged howl, rolling down from the Wind River peaks. Snow whipped across the trail, slicing sideways in sheets that stung Malia Redfern's face as she clutched the reins of the wagon that no longer obeyed her hands. The sky had dropped so low it felt like the mountains were closing in, swallowing the world whole. Wind punched through her coat. Cold stabbed straight through muscle, through bone, through will. This wasn't a storm. It was a verdict. Malia, the wagon driver's voice cracked. He was a nervous man to begin with, but now his eyes darted like cornered prey. This ain't worth it. The pass is closing. We'll die up here. We can't turn back, Malia shouted, shielding her eyes. Toby sat beside her, small and silent, the collar of his coat pulled up tight. His breath made shallow clouds in the air. He couldn't speak, he had never been able to, but his hand clutched her sleeve. Hard. Fear vibrated through him. We just have to make it another mile, she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. There's a trading stop near the ridge. We can shelter there. But the driver was no longer listening. Fear had already made his decision for him. I ain't dying for this job of yours, he barked, jumping off the wagon. He hit the snow, stumbled, then sprinted back down the trail, vanishing in the storm like he'd never been there at all. Wait, Malia shouted. You can't just leave Toby, but the man was gone. Only wind answered her. The horses panicked without their handler. The wagon lurched sideways, skidding on ice. Toby's hand tightened on her coat. The world spun in white as one of the wheels caught a hidden rock. The wagon tipped. Malia wrapped her arms around Toby and braced. The crash came like thunder. Snow exploded around them. A jolt tore through her back. For a moment, everything blurred, as if the cold had shaken the world loose from its frame. When she managed to open her eyes, the wagon was on its side, the horses bolting away into the storm. Malia, Toby mouthed, his lips barely moving. I'm here, she said, pushing up with trembling arms. But Toby wasn't moving right. His skin was pale. Too pale. His breath shallow, quick. She had seen this before. Winter sickness, frostbite, beginning its quiet work. We can't stay here. We'll freeze. She looked around, squinting through the white fury. No shelter, no trees, no sound except the roar of the wind. Panic throbbed beneath her ribs. She dropped to her knees beside Toby. I need you to listen, she said, holding his face between her hands so he could read her lips. I have to find help. There was a rock outcrop back there. It'll shield you from the wind. Toby shook his head violently. Snow clung to his lashes. I know, she whispered, pressing her forehead to his for a heartbeat. But if we wander together, we die together. She dragged him, half carrying, half pushing against the storm, until she found the narrow crevice in the rock. The wind softened there, but not enough. He was still in danger. She wrapped him in both blankets, tucking them under his chin, pulling her scarf over his nose. His fingers tugged her sleeve again. Harder this time. I'll come back, she said. I promise. She didn't know if it was a promise she could keep. But Toby nodded, trusting her the way he had trusted her every day of his life. She stepped out from the crevice, letting the storm swallow her. Every breath burned. Her boots sank deep into drifts that pulled at her ankles like hands. The cold clung heavy on her clothes, turning fabric into armor made of ice. She forced herself forward. One step, then another, and another. Time dissolved into the storm's rhythm, wind breath, pain. Wind breath, pain. Her thoughts frayed. Her limbs went numb. The world narrowed to the crunch of snow beneath her boots and the dull throb in her chest. If I stop walking now, she thought, no one will ever find me, not even God. The words echoed inside her skull, half prayer, half surrender. She stumbled, dropped to her knees. The snow welcomed her like a cold bed. She braced her hands to stand, but they slid. Her legs buckled again. Darkness reached at the corners of her vision. Not like this, not before Toby is safe. She forced herself upright, swaying like a candle flame in the wind. She blinked hard, searching the storm for anything, tree ridge, shadow, miracle. And then she saw it. A flicker. A pulse of orange through the white. Firelight. Her heart surged. She lurched toward it, tripping, crawling, dragging herself through drifts. The light grew brighter. Her breath hitched with desperate hope. A shape formed a cabin. Strong logs, a slanted roof smoke rising through a crooked chimney. Warmth. Real living warmth glowed behind its small window. Malia used the last of her strength to reach the porch. She struck the door with her fist, once, twice. Her hand slipped. Her vision cracked. The door opened. Warm air poured out. Then a figure filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in fur-clad layers. Snow clung to his beard. His eyes, dark and steady, widened as he saw her. "Help!" Malia tried to say, but her voice broke. The man didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, scooping her up with arms that felt carved from solid earth. Heat radiated from him, smoke pine leather. Her cheek pressed against a chest that felt safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Easy now," he said, his voice low, rough from disuse, yet strangely gentle. "You're safe." She tried to speak Toby's name, but blackness surged again. Inside, he murmured, carrying her over the threshold. "Let's get you warm." The door closed behind them, shutting out the world. She wasn't sure if she imagined it or not. But just before consciousness slipped away, she heard him say, "Mountain shouldn't have taken you today." Malia's last thought before the dark claimed her was Toby alone in the storm. When she woke again, her first word would not be thank you. It would be Toby. And the man who saved her would have to decide whether to risk the mountains once more. Snow crackled beneath the weight of boots as Elias Toohill paced the cabin's small main room. The fire in the hearth snapped and hissed, casting flickering shadows on the log walls, but his gaze kept flicking to the bundled figure lying on the bearskin near the stove. The girl-woman really hadn't stirred since he carried her in nearly an hour ago. She was young, no older than 25, her skin pale with cold and exhaustion. Dark hair clung to her cheeks in frozen strands. Her hands, even wrapped in layers of cloth, trembled faintly. Elias had seen the storm chew up plenty of folks in his years up here. This one had come close. And she hadn't come alone. She'd said a name before blacking out. Barely whispered, half-broken. Toby. He crouched beside her and checked her breathing. Slow, shallow, but steady. He'd gotten whiskey and coffee into her, stripped off the worst of her wet layers, and wrapped her in furs. But time was short. Whoever Toby was, friend, child, kin, was still out there in the kind of cold that didn't offer second chances. Elias rose, pulled on his heavy coat, the one lined with wolf hide, strapped his hunting knife to his belt, then slung his rifle over his shoulder. He paused near the door and glanced back at the girl. "You don't knock out here," he muttered, pulling on his gloves. "You just pray the door opens." Then he stepped into the white silence. The storm had lessened its rage, but not its grip. The air was dry and sharp as powdered glass. The snow came in waves now, gusting in sheets, swirling through the pines like ghosts. Elias moved quickly, his legs sure, despite the uneven terrain. This part of Wind River Range was his home, the land, the snow, the rhythm of weather. He knew how to read the sky, knew how long a boy could last without fire. He retraced the slope where he'd found her tracks barely visible now. A few broken branches, a heel print half swallowed, a piece of blue wool caught on a pine branch. He followed them down toward the boulder field east of the ridge, and then he saw it. A slight rise in the snow, almost unnatural. Elias knelt, brushed aside the drift with gloved hands. Beneath the white, a crevice in the rocks. A small shape bundled in wool and blanket curled up tight. "Hey, Elias," said his voice low but urgent. Kid, no response. He reached in carefully and touched the shoulder. It flinched. "Easy," he said. "I got you." The boy blinked up at him, dazed and stiff but alive. His lips were blue, his face slack with cold. No words came out, but Elias didn't need any. He tucked the boy against his chest, wrapping the extra hide around them both, then lifted him easily into his arms. "You're lucky she found my cabin," he murmured. "Lucky she made it." The boy stared up at him, eyes wide but trustful. Elias adjusted his grip and started the climb back. By the time he reached the cabin again, his legs burned and his breath came sharp, but the boy hadn't gone limp. That was a win. He kicked the door open and stepped into the warm rush of firelight. The girl was sitting up now, blinking at the flames like they were foreign. When she saw the boy, her body jolted. "Toby," she gasped. The boy squirmed, reaching toward her. Elias crossed the room and lowered Toby gently into her arms. She cradled him with trembling hands, pulling him in close, weeping silently. "You found him," she whispered hoarsely. "He was half buried," Elias said, shrugging off his coat. "Dug into a rock crevice. Smart choice." "I didn't know what else to do," she said, still clutching the boy to her chest. "He can't speak. He never has. He's my brother." Elias nodded. He held on. "That's what matters." She looked up at him, tears still glistening in her lashes. "You saved us." He didn't answer right away, just crouched by the fire and added another log. The flames roared higher, warm enough to thaw even what the mountain had nearly claimed. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Malia. Malia Redfern." "I'm Elias Toohill," he said. "This is my cabin. Closest thing to town is Elk Hollow, about 12 miles west." Malia blinked, stroking her brother's hair. "We were supposed to arrive there by sundown yesterday. I took a teaching post." "Well, Elias said Storm had other plans." She smiled faintly. "Seems like it did." He poured more coffee into a tin cup, added a splash of whiskey, and handed it to her. Her hands were steadier this time. She drank slowly, savoring the heat. "Thank you," she said again. "Not just for the fire, for going back." Elias met her gaze. Her eyes were tired but clear, the kind of eyes that had seen more than they let on. "You said his name before you passed out. That's the only reason I knew. I didn't even remember saying it." He sat back on his heels. "Storms like that don't care about memory. They strip you down to what matters." Malia looked toward the window where snow still tapped at the glass. "Is it always like this up here?" "Not always. Just often enough to remind you who's boss." She looked at Toby again. He was breathing more evenly now, curled against her side. "I thought I lost him," she said. "Thought I was sending him to die alone." Elias's voice softened. "You didn't. He's warm now. He'll be all right." For a long time, silence filled the room, quiet except for fire and breath, and wind whispering through the trees outside. Then Malia spoke again, softer now. "What happens when the storm ends?" You mean tomorrow? I mean after this. After you saved us. What do we do next? Elias stood and moved toward the window. He wiped the frost and stared out into the night. Storm like this one'll break by morning, he said. You'll have a long ride to town. I can get you there. She nodded. But there was more behind her question, and he didn't press it. Instead, he turned back toward the fire. The two of them, three of them, now sat in its glow, held together by circumstance and something deeper, something not yet spoken. Malia's head leaned back against the wall. Her eyes closed, but not from exhaustion this time. Toby's small hand rested against her heart, and Elias sat beside them, watching the fire, knowing that what had started as a rescue might turn into something he hadn't expected in years. By morning, the storm hadn't let go. If anything, it had grown teeth. And though the boy was safe, the mountain hadn't finished testing them yet. The storm didn't ease. If anything, it thickened heavier, snow, deeper silence. The kind that made a man feel like the world outside the cabin had ceased to exist. Elias Toohill stood at the window, jaw clenched, arms folded across his chest, as he watched the wind roll sideways against the glass. The drifts had grown so high they swallowed the fence posts. Trees groaned under the weight of it. Somewhere in the distance, a pine snapped like a rifle shot. Behind him, Malia dozed near the fire with Toby curled beneath her arm. She hadn't let go of the boy since he'd been brought in, but the tension had eased in her face, no longer pure survival, now something gentler. Still tired, still wary, but human again. Elias turned back to the fire, poked at it, added another log. Sparks fluttered up like fireflies and vanished into the dark chimney. He knew storms, had seen men go mad in less, had nearly been one of them. And yet here they were. Two strangers and a silent boy huddled inside his small world, with nothing but heat wood and breath to keep them whole. Malia stirred. "Is it morning somewhere?" Elias said. "Not here. No sun to prove it." She rubbed her face, voice still hoarse. "How bad is it?" He hesitated. "Bad enough that even the mountain cats ain't moving." She nodded, trying to sit up without waking Toby. Her fingers brushed the boy's hair. "We won't be able to leave today. Not unless you got wings I haven't seen." A small dry smile tugged at her lips. "No wings, just stubborn legs." He poured coffee for her. No whiskey this time. She'd need clarity, not warmth. She took the cup with both hands, savoring the steam. "I meant to say more last night," she said, eyes flicking to him. "Didn't get the chance." "You were half frozen." "That too." Her gaze dropped to the fire. "Thank you. Again." "You already did." "I'll probably keep doing it." Elias crouched beside the hearth, one hand steadying the kettle. "Most folks don't thank me more than once. Usually once is too much." She looked at him then, really looked, "Because you live up here alone." He didn't answer. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect? I don't know." She shrugged. "Something wilder, cruder, more dangerous." Elias met her eyes. "You don't know me yet. I know you carried my brother through a storm." He didn't reply. Words like that didn't sit easy in his mouth. Toby stirred. Malia tucked the blanket around him tighter. The boy's eyes opened barely, but his lips curved just a little when he saw Elias by the fire. A flicker of recognition, of safety. "You're good with him," Malia said. "I don't know anything about kids. Doesn't matter. He trusts you." Elias studied the boy. "He doesn't speak," Malia shook her head. "Born that way. Doctors called it congenital silence. Mama used to say it wasn't a curse. just meant his heart had to talk louder. Smart woman. She was. Silence settled between them again, not cold, not awkward, just quiet. The kind that filled space rather than hollowed it. Elias rose, moving to the window again. Drifts are piling faster than I expected. How long do you think it'll last? Could be another day. Could be 3. These storms don't take advice. Malia's lips pressed tight. The school board was expecting me yesterday. They already think I'm late because I'm careless. A woman, even a good one, doesn't get a second chance in towns like Elk Hollow. He turned to her. You almost died getting here. That's not carelessness. That's grit. They won't see it that way. They'll see someone who couldn't even make it to town on time. Someone who brought a brother with no voice and no father. Then they're fools. She blinked. You don't prove your worth to fools, Elias said, walking back to the fire. You prove it to yourself. She didn't speak for a while. Then that's easy to say when you've got nothing to lose. He gave a quiet snort. Lady, everyone's got something to lose. The trick is knowing what's worth keeping. Toby sneezed softly, and Malia reached for the kettle to pour him a little warm water. Elias passed her a clean tin cup without being asked. You always this prepared? She asked. I've had time to practice. How long have you lived here? 5 winters. Alone, Elias nodded. No family. He didn't answer right away. No one who stayed. Malia studied his face, the shadows in it, the silence behind it. There was pain there, old, scarred over, but not gone. Sometimes the mountain keeps what it takes, he said almost to himself. She looked up. Is that what happened to you? His jaw tightened. I lost people. Same as everyone. Just did it farther from town. Malia didn't push. Instead, she leaned back against the wall, eyes on the dancing flames. Toby's hand found hers. She squeezed it gently. You said the closest town is 12 miles. Give or take. Elk Hollow's not much, but it's where you'll find a schoolhouse and some stew. She smiled faintly. That's all I came for. He raised an eyebrow. Risked your life for stew. For a future, she said. For my brother. That quiet settled again, heavier this time. Full of things neither knew how to name. Outside, the storm roared like a warning. The mountain made no promises, but inside the fire burned steady, steadier than it had in years. Elias stood and stretched. You'll need rest. We'll eat soon. She nodded. And after that, he hesitated. We wait. Storm tells us when it's time. And if it doesn't, he looked at her serious now. Then we ride through it. Malia leaned back again, eyes drifting shut. Not from fear, not from despair, just from the weight of finally being warm and safe for now. By morning, the snow hadn't stopped. The wind had teeth again, and Elias would have to decide whether keeping these 2 strangers meant breaking the solitude that had once kept him alive. A crack from the fireplace stirred Malia awake. The scent of pine smoke filled the cabin, earthy and warm, clinging to her clothes, her hair, her skin. It was the kind of smell that wrapped itself around memory. Outside, the storm still hissed and growled, but its fury had dipped less of a scream, now more of a mutter, a tired wind. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Toby, who was still tucked against her side. His cheeks had color again. Not much, but enough to ease the knot that had sat in her chest for days. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. Cool, not cold. Warmth lived in him again. The hearth popped and Elias turned from the stove, a cast-iron skillet in one hand. Morning, he said. Malia blinked. Is it morning close enough? He moved easily through the space, quiet as ever. She watched him work, how he checked the flames, stirred the pan, added a pinch of something that smelled like sage. Everything about him moved like he'd done it all 1,000 times. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Like survival had become second nature. You don't sleep much, she said, her voice still rough with sleep. Enough to keep upright. I'm not sure I've ever slept this hard before. You needed it. She looked toward the window. The snow was still falling, but slower now. The world outside looked soft, like it had been muffled with cotton. The mountain looked less like a threat and more like a secret. Storms weakening, Elias said. Still not safe to ride out. She nodded. Then we wait. He brought her a plate flatbread, some kind of root vegetable strips of dried meat he'd crisped in the pan. Simple, but the smell alone made her stomach twist with hunger. He handed her a cup of fresh water, then crouched to check on the kettle. Thank you, she said. Doesn't take much to feed 2 more mouths. That's not what I meant. He didn't reply. Toby stirred beside her, rubbing his eyes. Elias handed her a small wooden bowl with mashed sweet potatoes and gestured for her to feed the boy slowly. She did, murmuring soft encouragement as Toby leaned into each bite. He was still too quiet, but alive. When the boy had eaten all he could, Elias settled across from her, cleaning the skillet with a rag, and a bit of snow melted over the fire. This cabin, she said. Did you build it yourself, every beam? She looked around. It was sturdy walls, fitted tight shelves, well-made, no drafts where drafts didn't belong. Books lined one wall, worn but carefully kept. Blankets hung by the door. A fiddle sat in the corner by a bench carved smooth with time. You ever think of living closer to people? Not once, he said without looking up. Not even when the cold bites like this. I was raised colder than this, he replied. I stay because it's quiet, because no one comes knocking, except you. She gave a wry smile. I didn't exactly knock. No, he agreed. You crashed into the door half dead. You sound disappointed. He glanced up then. If I were disappointed, I'd have let the storm take you. Something in his tone wasn't cruel, it was plain. Honest in a way most men weren't. She found herself studying him again, the cut of his jaw beneath the beard, the eyes that looked both younger and older than he was. Do you mind us being here? He paused. You're not a burden. You're just different than the kind of quiet I've grown used to. I could say the same about you. He gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. Malia drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I never planned to end up here. But the truth is, I didn't just come west for a job. Elias didn't interrupt. Just waited. My father worked at a bank in Jefferson. One day he stole money. Just a little. Enough to buy medicine for my mother when no one would help. Elias's eyes sharpened. Did he repay it? Every penny. But that didn't matter. People whispered. They always do. I lost my job at the school. Couldn't get hired again. So you ran. I left, she corrected. There's a difference. Elias nodded slowly. Running means you're afraid. Leaving means you've had enough. I had enough, she said. But that didn't mean I wasn't scared. He looked into the fire. You did what most wouldn't. Came out here with a child and no backup. I didn't see another way forward. He was quiet a moment. Then, almost to himself, he said, You can build a fire from nothing but bark and breath, but it won't last unless you feed it. She looked at him confused for a beat. What do you mean? You started something, Malia. A new life. Out here. But you gotta feed it. Tend it. Or it dies. She stared into the flames with him thinking how many fires she'd tried to start in her life that never caught. I'm tired of starting over, she whispered. Then stop starting. Start staying. She didn't reply, but something about the words landed deeper than she wanted to admit. Behind her, Toby leaned against her shoulder. She wrapped an arm around him, pulled him close. The boy's breath was slow and warm, her anchor. Elias stood crossed to the window again. Storm's still chewing on the trees, but if it weakens more by morning, we can make for town. She nodded. I'll be ready. He looked back at her. You sure about that? I've come this far. He didn't argue. A few hours later, while Toby napped, Malia helped mend one of Elias's shirts, the fabric worn thin near the collar. Elias worked silently on a broken harness strap, both of them seated in the firelight, like two old friends who had weathered more than snow together. The wind outside shifted direction. Softer now. More hesitant. Later that evening, as Malia folded blankets and stowed gear for the trip, Elias retrieved something from a shelf, an old fiddle case. He opened it slowly, almost reverently. Been a while, he said. You haven't in a long time. Figured you could use a song. She didn't speak, just nodded, heart tight in her chest. Elias tucked the instrument beneath his chin and drew the bow. The notes came soft, warm, simple melodies, nothing grand, just old hymns and songs that remembered better days. Malia closed her eyes, and for a moment there was no storm, no fear, just the sound of something fragile but true, like the first breath after almost drowning. The next morning brought a sky still heavy with gray, but the worst of the wind had died. Snow glistened untouched outside the cabin. Elias opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, breathing deep. He turned back toward the fire where Malia stood, coat already on, eyes steady. It's time, she said. He nodded once. Let's get you to town. But part of him already knew something about the quiet they'd built wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The fire had burned low by the time Malia woke. The warmth still lingered in the cabin, but the shadows had stretched longer, the kind that made walls feel closer than they were. Toby slept beside her, curled into the quilt like a cat. Outside, the wind had settled into a hush, like the mountain was listening, instead of shouting. She blinked the sleep from her eyes, sat up slowly, and glanced toward the window. The world outside was a sheet of gray, still snowing, but soft now. Gentle. Forgiving. Then she heard it. A sound from the other room. Not movement voice. Low. Broken. Foreign. Malia stilled every muscle in her spine, tightening. The door between rooms was ajar, just enough to see Elias's silhouette in the narrow bed. His body twisted under the blanket, restless, like he was fighting something invisible. His breath came fast, too loud in the quiet cabin. Then he spoke again. Not English. The words were harsh but melodic, rhythmic and raw. She didn't understand the language, but she knew what nightmares sounded like. She rose, padded softly across the floor in her socks, and stopped just short of the door. She didn't mean to listen. She just couldn't stop herself. Ni ishu. Doya. A pause. Then a gasp. The words hitched. Nahiu. Leave them. Leave the women. A violent jerk. Then silence. Malia's hand hovered over the doorframe. She didn't enter, didn't wake him. Instead, she stepped back slowly and returned to the fire. She sat down, hands wrapped around her knees, staring at the flames, but seeing something else. She'd heard those sounds once before. Years ago, at a summer gathering hosted by her father's tribe. Pawnee, not Shoshone, but similar roots. She knew the cadence, the ache in the vowels, the weight of memory embedded in words. Elias Toohill didn't just carry pain, he carried ghosts. When morning came fully with a pale light breaking through the clouds, Elias stepped out of the back room like nothing had happened. His shirt was loose hair damp from washing jaw freshly shaved. If he knew she'd heard anything, he gave no sign. "Storm's breaking," he said. "We can ride by midday." Malia nodded, but she didn't meet his eyes. Toby sat at the table chewing a biscuit, eyes bright. Elias tousled the boy's hair gently. "You ride horses, little man," Toby nodded once. "Good. Got one that's slow and steady. Won't give you trouble." As Elias stepped outside to prep the horses, Malia watched him through the frosted window pane. The man moved like he belonged to the snow. Efficient, controlled, but her mind was still full of the night before. When he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, she said quietly, "You were speaking another language in your sleep." Elias froze for half a breath. Was I Shoshone? He looked at her for a long time, jaw tight. "Yeah. You're half," he nodded. "Mother was Shoshone. Father white trapper. Not that it mattered much to either side. I belonged nowhere. You were dreaming about something. Something bad." Elias set his gloves on the hearth, his tone clipped. "I don't remember dreams." She didn't believe him. He knew it. She saw it in the way his hands flexed, in the flicker in his eyes. "I wasn't trying to pry," she said softly. "But you cried out. You said something about women." His eyes flicked toward her, then guarded. "What else did you hear?" "Just fragments. Something about... leave them." She swallowed. "Who were you talking to?" He turned away, picking up a leather strap to busy his hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "The past doesn't knock. It kicks down the damn door." The words fell heavy into the quiet. Malia stayed still, waited. Elias's voice was lower when he spoke again. "After the war, the army hired men like me. Half-bloods, scouts, guides. Said we could walk both worlds. Said we could help bring order to the frontier." He laughed bitter. What they meant was they needed someone who could point out where the villages were. Malia's breath caught. "I thought I was doing right," he continued. "Helping bring peace. Civilization. That's what they called it. But all I did was make it easier for them to burn down homes. Take what wasn't theirs. Kill people who looked like my mother." He finally looked at her, no anger in his face. Just the kind of regret that ate a man from the inside out. "I stayed with them too long. And when I couldn't take it anymore, I ran. Thought I could disappear into the mountains. Build a cabin. Trap game. Keep my head down." His mouth twitched. "Turns out ghosts climb just as well as men." Malia didn't move, didn't speak, only stared at him with something like sorrow, something like understanding. "Why tell me now?" she asked. "Because you'll hear it in town," he said. "Whispers, rumors. My name's not new out here, and I'd rather you know from me than from someone eager to twist it." She nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." He blinked, surprised. That's it. What were you expecting? Judgment, fear, distance. I've had all three thrown at me before, she said. It never felt like truth. She took a breath. You're not the man you were then. You don't know that. I know you walked into a storm for my brother. I know you've done nothing but protect us since the moment we arrived. That's more than most people in towns ever did for me. He looked down at the floor, at his hands, at the snow melting from his boots. You're not him anymore, she repeated. Whatever he did. You walked away. Silence stretched between them. Elias reached for the kettle, poured 2 cups, handed her one. She took it, their fingers brushing. They didn't speak after that. But something shifted. A gate unlatched. A truth acknowledged. By midday, the sky lightened. Not blue, but silver. The kind of light that said the worst had passed. Elias saddled the horses, his own big roan gelding, and a smaller bay mare for Malia and Toby to ride double. He tied packs tight, checked their gear, then stood with the reins in hand, staring at the trail ahead. Malia stepped out, coat fastened, scarf pulled tight. She paused beside him. You sure this trail's clear enough? It'll be rough, he said, but manageable. Toby climbed up first, wrapping his arms around his sister's waist. Elias steadied the mare as she swung into the saddle behind the boy. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of pine and distance. As Elias mounted, Malia looked over at him. Thank you. For telling me. For trusting me. He met her eyes. Trust don't come easy, he said. But some folks earn it faster than others. Then he nudged his horse forward. They rode in silence at first. Just the creak of leather and the slow crunch of hooves over hardened snow. But the quiet between them was different now. Not empty, just honest. By late afternoon, the edge of Elk Hollow appeared through the trees, plumes of smoke curling from chimneys, the sound of dogs barking faintly in the cold air. Elias's jaw set tighter. He hadn't ridden into town in over 3 years. And as they passed the frozen river, a dark figure sat on horseback beneath a ridge watching them descend. Jude Carson had arrived, and the past was done waiting at the door. The road into Elk Hollow wasn't much of a road at all, just a packed stretch of earth lined with snowbanks taller than a man's waist, the path worn smooth by sleds and hooves. The town sat low in the valley, quiet under a blanket of white. The buildings huddled together like they were trying to stay warm. Smoke curled from chimneys, slow and steady. Life moved, but it moved carefully. Malia sat straight in the saddle arms wrapped tightly around Toby as they rode through the edge of town behind Elias. Her stomach was a knot, the kind that didn't loosen with deep breaths. Eyes followed them from porches and windows, subtle but sharp. Children paused their snowball fights. A man hammering a fence post stopped mid-swing. Some watched her with curiosity. Others looked at Elias like he was a shadow come to life. Elias said nothing as they passed the mercantile, then the blacksmith shop, his posture firm, unreadable. But Malia didn't miss the way his fingers flexed around the reins, or how he scanned every alley, every side street like he expected something to step out. They stopped outside a tall brick building with a weathered sign above the door, Elk Hollow Schoolhouse and Town Meeting Hall. This is it, Elias said. Malia climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from the ride. She helped Toby off the horse, brushing snow from his coat. The boy clung to her side but kept his chin up. Brave as always. Boarding house is next road down, Elias added. Miss Heller runs it. She'll have your room ready. How do you know that? Malia asked. I sent word before the storm hit, he said. Didn't know if you'd make it, but figured someone should prepare. Before she could respond, the door behind them creaked open. A tall man in a brown wool coat stepped outside his collar, turned against the cold. He looked to be in his 50s, with silver streaking his beard and eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Redfern," he asked. Malia straightened. "Yes, sir. I'm Reverend Caleb Stone. We've been expecting you. Apologies for the delay." "The storm." He raised a hand. "No need." Word spread quick. "Folks saw you ride in." His eyes flicked to Elias, and his tone cooled slightly. "Didn't expect you to come with company." Elias held Caleb's gaze. "Didn't expect to be needed." "Lot of that going around lately," the Reverend said. Toby shifted beside Malia. She rested a hand on his shoulder. "I appreciate you holding the position," she said, redirecting the conversation. "I'm ready to begin as soon as possible." Caleb nodded. "You'll meet the school board tomorrow. For now, Miss Heller will see you settled." He turned, gesturing toward a young girl running down the road toward them. She was maybe 16, cheeks flushed, hair braided tight. "Sarah'll walk you down." Malia smiled at the girl. "Thank you." Sarah's eyes were wide as she took in Elias. "Is he with you?" Before Malia could answer, Elias swung down from his horse. "No, miss," he said. "I'm just passing through." Caleb stepped closer, keeping his voice low. That the truth, Two Hill Elias didn't blink. "I didn't come here looking for trouble. Trouble usually finds you anyway." Malia felt tension pull between them like a drawn bowstring. She stepped between them without thinking. "I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for this man," she said evenly. "Neither would my brother." Caleb studied her, then nodded slowly. "Gratitude's one thing. Reputation's another." Elias said nothing, just turned, mounted his horse, and tipped his hat to her. "I'll come back for the gear once you're settled," he said. "Wait," she said, stepping forward. "You're not staying." "Not unless you need me to." She hesitated. I thought maybe." "You belong here, Malia. With them." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He gave her one last look, something unreadable behind his eyes, then turned his horse and rode down the road, snow kicking up in his wake. Sarah tugged on her sleeve gently. Miss Redfern Malia nodded, blinking fast. "Yes. Let's go." They followed the girl down a narrower road lined with more modest homes. The boarding house was a wide structure, with ivy frozen against its sides and smoke curling from the chimney. Warm light spilled from the windows. Inside, Miss Heller greeted her with kindness, ushered them to a small but clean upstairs room, with a stove, 2 cots, and a view of the schoolhouse roof. Malia helped Toby out of his coat, brushed his hair, and tucked him into the bed nearest the wall. "You okay?" she signed. He nodded. Then he pointed toward the window, toward the direction Elias had gone. "I don't know," she signed back. "I hope so." She didn't sleep much that night. Her thoughts stayed on the man in the mountains, the things he'd confessed, the ghosts in his voice, and the way the Reverend had looked at him. She knew judgment when she saw it. By morning, word had spread. In the bakery, women whispered. At the well, men shook their heads. "Did you see who brought her in? Him, I thought he was dead. Heard he used to run with the scouts, the bad kind." Malia kept her chin high. Some folks greeted her with polite smiles. Others didn't look at her at all. It reminded her of home, and not in a good way. Still, she showed up at the schoolhouse before the sun was fully up. She swept the floors, organized the supply shelf, made a list of what she'd need. Children began to peek in through the windows. Toby helped set up chairs. His silence didn't bother her. It never had, but she could see the way others looked at him. Like something unfamiliar, something not quite right. When she stepped outside to breathe, she spotted a figure on horseback at the far end of town. Not Elias. This man sat too still, wore a black coat, watched too long. She squinted. The man turned his horse, trotted off. A chill ran deeper than the wind. That evening, as she closed the shutters, she heard boots on the front step. She turned. Elias. "I came for the rest of your things," he said. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You came back." "I said I would." He stepped inside, gaze scanning the space. "Looks like a school. Feels like something I built with pins and string." "You holding up?" she nodded. "Barely." He studied her a long moment. "If folks are turning cold, it's not your fault." "I've lived this before," she said quietly. "Different town. Different reason. Same faces." Elias shifted. "You want me to leave?" "No," she said. "I want you to stay." The air between them thickened, and then before either could say more, a horse whinnied outside. Another rider, a familiar silhouette. Jude Carson. Watching. Waiting. And Elias's past had just caught up. Jude Carson didn't dismount. He just sat there on his black gelding at the far end of the road, motionless as a carving, watching the schoolhouse like it was prey. His silhouette against the dying light made the snow around him glow pale and strange. Elias didn't move either. His jaw flexed once. His hands stayed at his sides, calm but tight. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet. Flat. "Guess he found me sooner than I expected." Malia stood at the threshold of the schoolhouse, heart thudding. "Who is he, Jude Carson?" "Old Scout. Same as me." She frowned. "One of your brothers in uniform," Elias said bitterly. "If you can call it that." They stood there in the snow, neither crossing the distance between them and Jude. The town around them felt frozen, like the streets themselves were holding their breath. A door creaked open somewhere. Then silence again. Toby peeked out from behind Malia, eyes wide. She reached back and gripped his hand. "Is he dangerous?" she asked. Elias's eyes never left the man on horseback. He was born dangerous. But that ain't what makes him trouble. Then what does he thinks he's right? The wind shifted, blowing snow across the road like a veil. Jude finally moved. He dismounted slowly, dropped to the ground with a crunch of boots. He didn't walk forward, just lifted a hand in a mock wave. "To Hill," he called, voice carrying clean through the cold. "That you, brother?" Elias didn't answer. Jude grinned. "I'll take that as a yes." He took a few steps forward, hands still visible, not reaching for a weapon yet. But something about the looseness in his gait made Malia nervous. He walked like a man who didn't need a gun to kill. "You've been busy," Jude said, glancing toward her. "Taught yourself some manners, looks like." Elias finally spoke. "What do you want?" Jude smirked. "Came for the same reason as always, looking for something that's owed." "You're 3 winters late," Elias replied. "And you're 3 graves shy of forgiveness," Jude said. The words dropped like stones. Malia stepped forward. "You need to leave." Jude looked at her with slow amusement. "You his woman. I'm someone who's not afraid of you." "That right?" He cocked his head. "Brave thing to say when you don't know the man you're standing next to." "I know enough." Jude's grin faded. "No, ma'am. You don't." Elias stepped in front of her, then not touching, but shielding. You said you came for what's owed. Spit it out. Jude's eyes darkened. Justice. For what you left us to rot, Eli. Left the others to die. You turned your back and disappeared into these hills while the rest of us were buried in dishonor. I left because I couldn't follow orders that killed women and children. Jude's jaw twitched. We were soldiers. No, Elias said. We were cowards with badges. A tense silence followed. Malia felt Toby press closer behind her. Jude's hand drifted to the hilt of his knife. I didn't come here to spill blood, he said. Then ride on, Elias replied. But I did come to remind you, Jude added. Ghosts don't die easy, and neither do debts. With that, he turned and walked back to his horse. Mounted slow, calm, like the words were heavier than bullets. Just before he turned down the trail, he called back, You can't outrun who you are, Elias, and you can't hide behind a woman and a mute boy forever. Then he was gone. The wind picked up again. The last light faded. Malia turned to Elias. He's not done. No, Elias said. He never is. She pulled Toby inside and shut the door. Elias followed but didn't sit, just stood by the window watching the road like it might split open. After a long silence, she said, What did he mean about debts? Elias didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was low, tired. There was a village in Montana territory. Mostly women elders' kids, the kind that never carried weapons. Word came down that they were aiding resistance scouts. We were ordered to clear it, burn it, make an example. Malia felt sick. You didn't. I didn't, he said. But Jude did, and the others. I tried to stop it. Fought some of them. Left before the fire spread. But it didn't matter. The bodies were already on the ground. He looked at her then. And I ran. Coward, maybe. Or maybe I just didn't want to become them. She walked toward him slowly. And now one of them's back to make sure I regret it. Toby sat silently near the stove watching them both. You think he'll return? Malia asked. Elias nodded. Not alone. Men like Jude don't come for reminders. They come for war. What will you do? Elias's voice was steady. What I should have done years ago. She touched his arm gently. Don't do it alone. His eyes met hers. You'd stand with me, I already am. The fire crackled behind them. The snow whispered at the windows. For a moment, the quiet was a kind of peace. Then a knock came at the door. Sharp, measured. Elias opened it to find Reverend Stone standing there, snow in his beard. I saw Carson, the Reverend said, and I heard some of it. Elias stepped aside. Then you know what's coming. Caleb nodded. Some folks won't like it, but they need to choose. Town won't survive if they stay silent. Will you help? Malia asked. The Reverend looked at her, then at Elias. I buried too many innocents during the war. If Carson's come to start something, I won't be the one who stands idle. Elias gave a short nod. Then we start tonight. They sat around the fire planning. They made lists who to trust, where to watch, which paths into town were most exposed. Malia kept notes. Toby curled up beside her, listening. By the end of the night, the lines were drawn. Outside, miles up the ridge, Jude Carson sat by his campfire, sharpening his knife. Around him, 4 other men leaned in close, men with eyes like wolves and fingers that twitched near holsters. Jude looked up at the sky. "He's got himself a little army," he said. A man beside him spat into the fire. "That mean we wait?" "No," Jude said. "We strike before they think they're safe." Snow began to melt in the afternoons. Not much, just enough for patches of mud to appear along the edge of the road, and for icicles to loosen their grip from the eaves. But Elias didn't trust the thaw. Not with Jude Carson circling the edges of town like a wolf testing a fence. Inside the schoolhouse, Malia moved desks into tighter rows, checking and rechecking the supplies. Caleb had brought over 2 old hunting rifles from the church cellar. Elias examined each, carefully cleaned the barrels, and laid them beneath the teacher's desk, out of sight, but within reach. Outside, the townsfolk gathered in slow clusters, murmuring low. Some had seen Jude's men ride the ridgeline. Some had heard the threats. But it wasn't fear that had them murmuring. It was doubt. What's he really done lately? He kept to himself all these years. Maybe this is all old trouble, nothing for us to get in the middle of. Reverend Stone stood on the steps of the meeting hall and watched them. Elias joined him there mid-morning, shoulders square, boots heavy with fresh dirt. "You hear what they're saying?" Elias asked. Caleb nodded. "They want to believe it'll pass." "It won't." "No," the Reverend said, "but hope's easier to hold than a rifle." Elias looked toward the schoolhouse window, where he could just make out Malia's silhouette moving behind the glass. "She doesn't hope," he said quietly. "She prepares. She reminds me of someone. Who my wife Caleb said. She died in Kansas. Border raid. She was the only one who didn't panic. Got 8 children into a cellar before the fire touched the roof. Didn't make it herself." Elias said nothing. He didn't need to. They stood in silence together, watching the wind lift bits of straw along the street. Then came the sound of hooves. Not galloping, not fast, but steady, measured. Jude Carson rode into town like it belonged to him. No gun drawn. No posse behind him. Just him and that black gelding eyes, sharp as razors. He stopped in front of the mercantile, dismounted, and tied the reins like he was there to buy flour. Then he turned and looked straight at Elias. "Nice day for a visit," he called. Elias didn't move from the steps. "Ain't your town." "Yet." Malia stepped out of the schoolhouse, then eyes narrowing. Jude's gaze shifted to her and lit with something sly. "You always had a taste for trouble." "Too Hill," he said. "But I didn't figure you'd die for it. You talk a lot for someone who rides alone." "I ain't alone," Jude said. "Not really." He turned then slowly to the crowd that had started gathering, folks drawn like flies to tension. "Some of y'all know me," he said, raising his voice just enough. "You know I fought for the frontier, helped keep your rail lines safe, cleared the roads of raiders and thieves. And what do I see now? A man who once stood with me now hiding behind a teacher and a crippled kid." Malia stepped down onto the dirt street. "Say one more word about my brother, and I'll make you swallow your teeth." A ripple went through the crowd. Jude smiled, but his eyes didn't. "I've got 5 men camped less than a mile outside town," he said. "One word from me and this whole place goes up in smoke." "Then you'd better ride fast," Elias said, voice hardening. "Because you'll be dead before you light the first torch." Jude tilted his head. "You think these people'll fight for you?" He turned back to the crowd. "You think this man's worth dying for?" he asked them. "Because he sure as hell wasn't worth following." No one spoke. A few folks looked down. A couple drifted back toward their porches. The silence hit harder than a bullet. Caleb stepped forward then. We don't let murderers make our decisions here. Jude's grin faltered. Watch your tongue, preacher. Or what? You'll burn another church. Jude's hand twitched near his belt. But he didn't draw. Instead, he backed toward his horse. This is your last warning, he said. Turn 2 hill over, or we come back at sundown. He mounted slow, took one last long look at Malia. You're making a mistake. I've made worse, she said. Then he turned and rode back up the road, vanishing over the ridge. As soon as he was gone, Elias turned to the Reverend. You saw it. Caleb nodded. He was measuring us. We've got ours. The 2 men split off Caleb to rally what few willing hands remained Elias to secure the schoolhouse. Malia followed him in. He'll be back, she said. Elias nodded. With more men. Guns this time. I heard what he said. About the crowd. About handing you over. Yeah. You think they will. Some of them are thinking about it. Then they'll have to go through me too. Elias turned, met her eyes. I ain't asking you to do that. You don't have to. I made up my mind. He stared at her a moment, then said softly, You ever think you'd be the one drawing a line in the sand? She smiled faintly. You ever think anyone would stand on your side? He let out a dry breath. No. They spent the next hour moving desks, nailing boards over windows, stashing extra food and water in the corner. Malia laid out a blanket for Toby in the small back room, handed him a book, and kissed his forehead. You stay here, she told him. No matter what you hear, don't come out. The boy nodded, eyes wide. By late afternoon, Caleb returned with 3 men, 2 hunters, and a young ranch hand. They had old rifles, nervous hands, and something like resolve behind their eyes. Not much of a militia, one joked. It only takes 1 match to burn a barn, Elias replied. We're the barn. Let's make them work for it. As the sun dropped behind the mountains, the air turned brittle. The kind of cold that snapped bones if you moved too fast. From the window, Malia saw torches flicker along the ridge. 5 riders, maybe 6, moving like shadows with fire in their hands. She loaded a rifle, set her jaw, and turned to Elias. We do this together, she said. He nodded. Outside, the torches grew brighter. Inside, the fire in the stove cracked once sharp like a shot. And the night began. The fire burned, but it didn't take everything. Smoke still lingered in the morning air, the scent of scorched wood and spent powder curling between buildings, like a ghost that hadn't been told it was free to leave. The schoolhouse stood battered, but whole, its windows cracked, front steps scorched, but the bell still hung above the doorway, unbroken. Inside, Malia wiped blood from the floor with a damp cloth. Not all of it was from Elias. Not all of it from the enemy either. That was the truth about battle lines. Blurred wounds bled the same. Outside, the town was quieter than usual, but not silent. Men repaired fences. Women hung quilts across shattered glass. Children, nervous and unsure, peeked around corners. Life didn't stop. It staggered forward. Elias sat on the bench near the church, his shoulder bound in fresh linen, one arm cradled against his chest. Caleb sat beside him, face pale, pain etched deep. They'd made it through, but not untouched. Sheriff Gaines had arrived just before dawn. Late. Conveniently so. He'd claimed his horse had gone lame in the pass, and that he'd only just heard the gunfire. Malia had said nothing. Elias hadn't even looked at him. Now the sheriff stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, squinting at the prisoner inside the jail, Jude Carson, alive but barely. 2 slugs in him and a rage that still smoldered behind his eyes. "What are we supposed to do with him?" Gaines asked. Caleb answered before Elias could. "There'll be a trial. Witnesses. Evidence. If this town wants to pretend it's got laws, now's the time to prove it." "You sure you want to give him that much dignity?" the sheriff muttered. Elias looked up. "Justice without dignity ain't justice. It's revenge." Gaines spat into the dirt. "You and your high roads." Caleb said nothing, just rose slowly, steadied himself with a hand on Elias's good shoulder, and made his way down the steps. Later that afternoon, Malia joined Elias on the bench. She handed him a tin cup of tea, sat beside him without a word. For a long time, they just watched the town slowly mend. "You were willing to die for us," she said. He took a sip of tea. "Wasn't the first time I thought I might. But it was the first time someone stood beside you." Elias looked at her, then really looked. The exhaustion in his eyes had shifted. Not gone, but quieter. Less heavy. "You're right," he said. "That was new." She turned slightly, facing him. "The people are watching Elias. They saw who fought for them, who stood. That matters. They also saw who ran, who hid." She shrugged. "They'll remember both, but they'll choose who to follow next time." A long silence passed between them. Then he said softly, "I don't know how to be that man. Not full time." "You already are," she said. "You just haven't let yourself believe it." At sundown, the church bell rang once. Not for a sermon, for a gathering. Inside, the pews were fuller than they'd been in months. Even those who hadn't fired a shot showed up, guilt in their eyes, or maybe curiosity. Caleb stood at the front, arm in a sling. He didn't shout, didn't sermonize, just said what needed saying. This town stood on a ledge yesterday, he began, and not all of us stepped forward. But some did, and some of them weren't even from here. He looked at Malia, then Elias. "We owe them more than thanks. We owe them truth." He stepped back. Let the silence settle. Then slowly, Malia rose. She walked to the front, turned, faced the people who had once eyed her like a stranger. She didn't raise her voice either. Just let the quiet carry it. "When I arrived here, I didn't expect a welcome. I've lived in places like this. I know what I look like. I know what my brother's silence makes people assume." Murmurs stirred, uncomfortable. "But when the fire came to your doorstep, we didn't ask who deserved saving. We fought because it was right, because that's what community means." She paused. "Let that land." "I came here to teach letters and numbers," she added. "But maybe there's something bigger to learn first." She stepped down. People didn't clap. They stood, one by one, slowly, as if by rising they were admitting they hadn't before. It wasn't grand. It wasn't redemption. But it was a start. Back outside, the sky darkened into indigo. Stars pricked the horizon. Elias sat beside Toby on the front steps of the schoolhouse. The boy leaned into him, shoulder against shoulder. "He's been drawing," Malia said, coming up behind them. Toby held up a page, crude but clear. It was the schoolhouse. A man on the roof, rifle raised. And beneath him, a girl and a boy standing side by side. Elias stared at it a long time. "Is that me?" he asked. Toby nodded, then pointed at the boy. Elias swallowed hard. "That you?" Another nod. "I never had a brother," Elias said softly. Malia sat beside them. You do now. He looked out at the street, quiet and still. The fire burned, he said, but it didn't take everything. And then for the first time in years, Elias Toohill smiled, not for show, not to hide, but because something had shifted, something had begun. Peace didn't come easy, but it had come, and this time it felt like it might stay. Spring Hollow never forgot what happened that night, not because of the violence or the fire or the blood dried into the floorboards of the schoolhouse, but because of what came after. The morning after the shootout, no one asked Malia or Elias to leave. No one looked away when they walked down Main Street. People nodded now. Some even smiled. The town didn't say thank you, much too proud for that, but they said it in other ways. By early spring, Elias had traded in his rifle for a hammer. He spent more days helping rebuild the church steps than sharpening any blade. Toby followed him like a shadow, always watching, always learning. Malia resumed teaching, and though the schoolhouse still had bullet holes, her voice carried over them like nothing had ever happened. Still, the question lingered: what next? Jude Carson's trial was scheduled for early April. The circuit judge was due to arrive from Dodge City in 2 weeks. Until then, Jude sat in the jailhouse, guarded in shifts by Elias Caleb, and more surprisingly by 2 of the townsfolk who'd once looked the other way. On the porch of the schoolhouse, Malia poured Elias a cup of coffee and handed it to him. "He's been quiet," she said. "He's thinking. Jude only shuts up when he's planning something." She gave him a look. "You think he'll try something before the trial?" Elias shook his head. "He's not that stupid. Not now. He knows the town wouldn't back him anymore." Toby sat on the steps, sketching again. His drawings were clearer now, more confident. He'd started giving names to the people in them. He no longer drew monsters in the corners. But Elias noticed something else. Jude kept showing up in the pages. Sometimes tied. Sometimes in shadow. Always there. That night, Elias brought a blanket to the jail and sat across from Jude. He didn't say anything at first, just sat in the silence. Finally, Jude looked up. "That preacher boy gonna give me a sermon too. He said you weren't worth wasting breath on." I disagreed. Jude smirked. "You always were the sentimental type." Elias stared. "What happened to you, Jude? The man I knew, he wasn't good. But he wasn't this. We all become something." "Elias," Jude said, voice low. "The war didn't end when the smoke cleared. It just got quieter. And quiet kills men like me." Elias leaned forward. "You burned a village. You killed children. You tried to do it again here. That's not war. That's something else." "Call it what you want," Jude muttered. "It was survival." Elias stood slowly. "No. It was cowardice." He left the jailhouse without slamming the door. Jude didn't yell. He just sat back down, eyes lost somewhere only he could see. 3 days later, the stagecoach arrived. Judge Meredith Caldwell stepped off wearing a thick wool coat and a scowl. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, and had the kind of authority that didn't need announcing. "Where's my prisoner?" she asked before accepting water or food. They brought her to the jailhouse, and she looked at Jude the way one might inspect a dying coyote. "You'll get your day," she said. "But if I find so much as a whisper of jury tampering, I'll hang you myself." The trial was scheduled for 2 days later. That night, Elias sat with Caleb outside the chapel. "You ever think we'd be the ones watching justice walk into town on a stagecoach?" "Not in my lifetime," Caleb said. "But we're here. That counts." Elias nodded, then asked, "You ever think about leaving this place?" Caleb considered it. "Every damn day. But leaving and staying both take courage. It's just a matter of which you got more of. That stuck with Elias long after Caleb went home. The day of the trial, the town gathered in the meeting hall, not just for curiosity, but for witness. Elias sat in the back. Malia sat near the front with Toby, her hands steady even as tension built in the room. Jude was brought in cuffed. He didn't speak. The testimonies were brief but brutal. Malia recounted the night of the attack. Caleb described Jude's threats. The hunters gave their accounts. Even the ranch hand stood up and told the court how Jude had tried to light the school on fire. But the most powerful voice came from an unexpected place. Toby. He stood with his notebook in hand and drew a picture in front of the court. It showed Jude with flames around him, the schoolhouse in the background, Malia shielding him. He didn't say a word, but he didn't need to. Elias watched the room hold its breath. After the jury was excused, Judge Caldwell asked if the defendant had anything to say. Jude stood. You want regret? I don't have it. You want guilt. Find someone weaker. I did what I had to. He sat again. The room stayed silent. The verdict was returned before sunset, guilty. The sentence, life imprisonment. Not death. That was the judge's mercy or her punishment. After court adjourned, the town filed out slowly. No cheers, no applause. Just a long, heavy breath let out after years of holding it in. Outside, Elias stood at the steps. Malia came to his side. It's over, she said. He shook his head. No, it's starting. The hard part comes now. She looked at him. Then let's do it together. He didn't answer with words, just reached for her hand, and together they walked into the quiet of a town beginning again. Because the truth was clear now, the law only matters if we carry it ourselves, and they would, one step at a time, even if it hurt, even if it meant facing what came next. The snow had long since melted. Grass pushed up in patches along the hills behind Spring Hollow. The sky was warmer, easier, like it had finally remembered how to be kind again. Wind carried the scent of wild sage and the river ran with meltwater from the distant peaks. It was spring in name and spirit. And for the first time in years, Elias Toohill didn't flinch at the quiet. He stood near the barn outside the schoolhouse, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow, as he worked beside Toby fixing a new post to the fence line. The boy hammered with surprising precision. Small hands, confident, patient. You sure you want to keep doing this? Elias asked, nodding to the line of posts that stretched out like a spine down the hill. Toby shrugged, grinned, then pointed to the sketch in his journal: fences, cabins, trees, a hand-built home beside the school. He had vision. Elias could see it, the kind that didn't come from fear or survival, but from hope. Elias smiled. All right then, let's finish it. Your way. At the schoolhouse porch, Malia sat in the sun, a mug of coffee in her hands, watching them work. Her hair had grown out a bit, and she'd taken to braiding it back with a red ribbon Toby had picked from the market. She was wearing a cotton dress that Elias swore made the sky jealous. It was the first time he'd seen her sit still in days. Inside the classroom, the blackboard bore new names, 10 students now. The school had grown. Children from ranches miles out rode in by cart or on horseback. Some of their parents helped build the benches. One even donated books. Spring Hollow had changed. Not fast, not loudly, but truly. Caleb still gave sermons twice a week, though he swore the real work happened outside the church. The townsfolk had elected him to the new council they formed after the trial. Sheriff Gaines, despite all odds, had stayed if only to prove he could change too. And to everyone's surprise, he had. The saloon was quieter now. Less drinking, more music. Families came in for supper sometimes. The barkeep had even put in a piano. As for Jude Carson, he was transferred to the territorial prison just outside Wichita. No one celebrated it, but no one mourned it either. He became what he always feared forgotten. One afternoon, weeks after the trial, Elias and Malia walked to the ridge above town. Toby stayed behind, building with spare wood and drawing in the dirt. They sat side by side beneath an old twisted pine. "You ever think about going east?" Elias asked. "Teaching somewhere bigger, somewhere safer?" Malia looked at him. "You ever think about running again?" He grinned. "Fair." She tucked her knees under her skirt and leaned her shoulder against his. "Back there in that cabin when the blizzard hit," she said, "I thought the world had ended. I didn't think anyone would find me. I didn't think I'd open the door for anyone again. But you did. And you stayed." Silence stretched, but not uncomfortably. "You know, Malia said most people think stories end when the danger's gone. The villain's locked up, the town is saved. They think healing's instant." "Yeah," she nodded. "But the real story starts after, when it's quiet again, when there's no one to fight but yourself." Elias turned toward her. "And how are we doing?" she smiled. "We're learning." They sat there until the sky turned gold, until the shadows stretched long and soft. When they finally stood, Elias reached for her hand, and she didn't let go. Back in town, a new sign hung above the schoolhouse Spring Hollow Learning Hall. Beneath it, smaller letters read, "All are welcome." It had been Malia's idea, but the town had paid for it. It was hand-carved, oiled, and sealed, a permanent thing. That evening, Elias helped light lanterns outside. A new tradition. Fridays meant open-air lessons, stories, sometimes music. The kids gathered on hay bales and blankets. Parents brought warm bread or jars of sweet cider. Tonight, Caleb brought a fiddle. The first tune was slow, almost solemn, then faster, livelier. Toby danced with the other children, wild-footed and laughing. Malia read aloud from a new book. Elias stood beside her, watching the way her voice carried across the yard like wind through pine. When the last story ended, silence hung for just a second. Then a little girl raised her hand. "Miss Malia," she said, "was that a real story?" Malia smiled. "What do you think?" The girl paused, thoughtful. "I think it's real. 'Cause it felt like it could be." Elias looked out at the gathered faces, tough men, tired women, shy children, all of them sitting together, listening. "That's how you know," he said softly. "Truth don't always look grand. Sometimes it's just what stays with you." After the crowd thinned, Malia and Elias sat on the porch steps. Toby had fallen asleep beside them, head on Malia's lap. "He's not scared anymore," she whispered, brushing Toby's hair back. "He still doesn't talk. But he's not scared." "He's not the only one," Elias said. The stars came out one by one. Coyotes howled somewhere in the distance, far enough not to matter. Elias tilted his head back, looked up. "You think this lasts?" Malia didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed her eyes and breathed deep, then said, "It does if we build it right. Not fast, not perfect, but together." Elias nodded. "Then I reckon we've got work to do." She smiled. "Always." He looked over at the schoolhouse, the fields beyond the faint orange of lanterns and windows up the street. "This place," he said, "I used to think it was where people came to get stuck. Now I think it's where people come to grow." Malia rested her head on his shoulder. Maybe both. He chuckled. Yeah, maybe both. The night settled around them, and though there was no great announcement, no flag raised or bell rung, something had shifted. Spring Hollow was no longer a place waiting to die. It was a place learning how to live. In the end, they hadn't just fought for survival. They fought for dignity, for community, for the kind of quiet that comes not from hiding, but from healing. Because in a town like this, tucked between river and rock, sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't fight a war. It's stay, it's teach, it's build, and sometimes the bravest kind of freedom is the one you share.